Level 1. Anu, King of Heaven. Before any city was built, before any king was crowned, before the concept of divine authority existed in recorded human thought, there was a throne. Not a metaphor, a physical throne described in Sumerian texts with architectural precision, seated above a layered cosmic structure the ancient scribes called the heavens. And the being seated on it was Anu. Anu, whose name simply means sky in ancient Sumerian, stands at the apex of the entire Anunnaki pantheon. He is the source from which all divine authority flows. Not through conquest, not through wisdom, but through something the Sumerians called the Anuship, a kind of cosmic legitimacy that had no origin story of its own. It simply was. Anu is one of the oldest attested deities in recorded human history. Cuneiform inscriptions from as far back as 3500 BCE reference his authority, making him contemporaneous with the very invention of writing itself. He ruled a cosmic tier called the An, the uppermost layer of existence, and beneath him stretched a hierarchy so formalized it included contracts, quotas, and administrative roles for every god beneath his station. This was not mythology organized loosely around feeling. This was a bureaucracy of divinity, documented like a census. His symbol was a horned crown, not worn on a head depicted in the tablets, but drawn alone, empty, as if the being beneath it was too vast to represent directly. Cylinder seals from the early dynastic period, circa 2900 BCE, show other gods bowing in his direction rather than facing him. Even in images, he was approached obliquely. Here is where the comfortable version of Anu stops. In the Atrahasis Epic, one of the oldest flood narratives on record, predating the biblical version by over 1,000 years, Anu is not a benevolent skyfather. He is a manager. He convenes a council meeting, and the agenda item is humanity. Specifically, whether humanity has become too numerous, too loud, and too much of a problem to continue without reduction. High votes. The flood is not a punishment for sin in this telling. It is a resource management decision made by a governing body. Anu chairs the meeting. That framing, humanity as a problem to be managed rather than a creation to be cherished, runs through every document connected to this figure like a cold current beneath warm water. And Anu was not the one who pushed back against that decision. That was someone else entirely. Level 2. Enki, the Lord of the Abyss. In 2017, archaeologists working in the ancient city of Girsu in what is now southern Iraq uncovered a cache of cuneiform tablets that expanded the known corpus of texts related to a single Anunnaki figure by nearly 12% in one excavation season. Hymns, incantations, and what appeared to be technical instructions. All of them addressed to Enki, the god of wisdom, fresh water, magic, and, depending on which text you read, the genetic engineering of human beings. Enki was not Anu's heir. He was his son, and according to most Sumerian cosmological texts, he ranked second in the divine hierarchy. Though in terms of raw presence across the archaeological record, no other Anunnaki figure comes close to matching his footprint. His domain was the Abzu, a subterranean freshwater realm beneath the earth, the source of all rivers and springs, and he held within it the Me, pronounced May, a collection of divine tablets encoding the fundamental laws of civilization. Writing, kingship, descent into the underworld, sexual intercourse, musical instruments, lying, all catalogued, all stored in Enki's possession. His temple at Eridu, one of the oldest cities ever excavated, dates to approximately 5,400 BCE, and it was rebuilt 17 times on the same foundation over millennia. 17. The footprint of the structure never moved. Whatever was being venerated, there was venerated with extraordinary continuity and geographic precision. In the Atrahasis Epic, Enki is the one who defies the divine council's decision to destroy humanity. He warns a single man, Atrahasis, later echoed as Utnapishtim in Gilgamesh, later echoed as Noah, to build a vessel and survive the flood. Not through direct warning, which was apparently prohibited. He speaks to the man through the walls of a reed hut, claiming he is addressing the hut itself rather than its inhabitant. A technicality, a legal loophole inside divine law. That is the detail that shifts things. Every mythology has a trickster, but Enki is not a trickster in the chaotic sense. He is a lawyer who loves humanity enough to exploit procedural ambiguity on its behalf. That is not a comfortable role for a deity. That is the role of someone who knows exactly how the system works and finds it, on some level, wrong. Among the seven, he is the one who most consistently chooses humans over hierarchy. Every time the choice appears in the text, he makes the same call, which makes one specific Sumerian text, discovered in Nippur in the 19th century, genuinely difficult to sit with. Level 3. Enlil, the wind that ends worlds. 53,000 cuneiform tablets have been recovered from Nippur, the ancient religious capital of Sumer, dedicated in significant part to one being, not Anu, not Enki, Enlil, and scholars who specialize in this material describe his presence in the corpus as totalizing, meaning there is almost no aspect of Sumerian religious, legal, or political life that does not flow through him. Enlil is Anu's son and Enki's brother, and in practical terms, he ran the world while their father occupied the throne of heaven. His title was Lord of the Wind, or Lord of the Air. But those translations flatten something the original Sumerian preserves. Enlil's domain was not weather. It was the breath between earth and sky, the medium through which all divine commands traveled. He was the signal carrier, the executive authority. In the Sumerian understanding, no king could legitimately rule without Enlil's explicit endorsement, a concept so central to political life that it functioned as constitutional law for over 2,000 years across multiple civilizations. He destroyed cities, not as metaphor. In a lament text called The Lamentation over the Destruction of Ur, written after the city's devastation around 2004 BCE, Enlil is named directly as the deity who ordered the city's destruction, not as punishment, as scheduled administrative erasure. The city's time had passed, he reallocated divine favor. The text reads less like a theological document and more like a termination notice. In the Atrahasis Epic, Enlil is the one who calls the vote to flood the earth. He is also the one who, upon discovering that Enki helped a human survive, flies into a documented divine rage. The tablets describe him as furious not because survival happened, but because the decision was circumvented through procedural maneuvering. He was angry about the loophole, not the outcome. After his anger subsides, he accepts the survival, blesses the humans who lived, and recalibrates population management policy going forward, as though the near extinction of the species was a negotiation that simply needed better terms. No editorial needed. That is what the tablets say. The next figure is the one who walked between the dead and the living, and in doing so, may have defined what humanity understood about mortality for 3,000 years. Level 4. Ereshkigal, Queen of the Great Below, cold, dark, a place where the dead drink dust and eat clay. That is how the Sumerians described the underworld. Not as fire, not as torment in the Christian sense, but as an absence so complete it became its own substance. And ruling it alone on a throne no living being could approach without forfeiting life was Ereshkigal. She is the oldest documented queen of the underworld in recorded human history, predating the Greek figure of Persephone by well over 1,000 years. Unlike Persephone, she was not taken. She was given, or in some versions fell, into the great below at the formation of the cosmos. And what the texts describe afterward is not imprisonment, it is sovereignty. Grim, absolute, and entirely her own. Her name translates roughly to Great Lady of the Great Below, and no text ever depicts another deity governing her realm or overriding her decisions within it. Not even Anu. The fullest narrative involving Ereshkigal is the Descent of Inanna, one of the most extraordinary literary documents from the ancient world, composed in full no later than 2100 BCE, with likely older oral antecedents. In this text, her sister Inanna descends into the underworld uninvited. At each of the 7 gates, Inanna is stripped of one divine power: her crown, her measuring rod, her lapis lazuli necklace, until she arrives before Ereshkigal naked and powerless. Ereshkigal kills her, hangs her corpse on a meat hook, then mourns. That mourning is what no one talks about. Mid-narrative, Ereshkigal is described as crying out in labor pains that are not labor, grieving for children already dead, for men and women who died before their time. She is the ruler of the dead who feels every death. The Sumerian scribes gave the queen of a place without light the emotional interiority of someone carrying a weight no other god is forced to carry. When Inanna is eventually resurrected through Enki's intervention, Ereshkigal does not release her freely. She enforces the law of the underworld. No one leaves without a substitute. Inanna must send someone in her place. That someone turns out to be her husband, chosen by Inanna herself, in anger. The underworld runs on law, and Ereshkigal enforces it without exception, even against family. What the scholars note, and what the popular accounts almost universally ignore, is that Ereshkigal's law predates every legal code we have attributed to human civilization, by centuries. Level 5. Inanna, the goddess who would not be contained. 8-pointed star, that is her symbol. Found stamped on cylinder seals from 3200 BCE, carved above city gates, pressed into the clay of royal correspondence for over 3 millennia across Mesopotamia, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria. Before she became Ishtar in the Akkadian pantheon, before she became Astarte, before the Greeks mapped her onto Aphrodite and the Romans compressed her into Venus, she was Inanna, and she was something none of those later identifications fully preserved. Inanna was the Sumerian goddess of love, war, justice, and political power, and the tension between those domains was not incidental. It was the whole point of her. In the surviving hymns composed by Enheduanna, a high priestess of Ur who lived around 2285 BCE and is the first named author in recorded human history, Inanna is addressed with a theological intensity that reads, less like worship and more like awe at something barely governable. Enheduanna wrote 42 hymns. 37 of them are addressed to Inanna. The language is raw, urgent, personal, in a way that predates any similar religious writing by over 1,000 years. Inanna dismantled the divine me. Not stole. Dismantled. In the myth of Inanna and Enki, she travels to Enki's domain in the Abzu, drinks with him through a banquet that unfolds across multiple rounds, and by the end she is walking away with the me in her boat. All of them: writing, kingship, descent, ascent, sacred prostitution, heroism, falsehood, the arts of the smith. Enki wakes and sends emissaries to reclaim what he realizes he gave away. She refuses, returns to her city. The gates open. Civilization, the Sumerian scribes are telling you, exists because Inanna took it and kept it. She descended into the underworld willingly, was killed, and returned. In Babylon, during the period of her descent in the ritual calendar, sexual activity was prohibited, trade halted, and the dead were said to walk among the living. An entire civilization paused for the absence of a single deity. She chose who became king, removed kingship from those she deemed unworthy. In texts from Ur III, circa 2100 BCE, the mechanism of divine kingship is explicitly tied to her favor and her withdrawal. Kings rose or collapsed not by battlefield performance alone, but by whether Inanna was pleased. The uncomfortable part is how precisely that model, divine woman grants or revokes political legitimacy, was systematically written out of every subsequent religious tradition that inherited the Sumerian framework. Someone had a reason to remove that particular piece. Level 6. Nergal, the god who conquered death by marrying it. His name in Sumerian may derive from a phrase meaning Lord of the Great Dwelling, the same phrase used for the underworld. Before he became its co-ruler, Nergal was the deity of war, plague, and the destructive aspect of the midday sun. Not the warmth. The heat that does not nourish but kills. drought, pestilence. The specific angle of sunlight that turns a harvest to dust. That was his domain, and it made him feared in a different register than Enlil. Less administrative, more primal, closer to the body. His mythology takes a turn the ancient world found important enough to preserve in multiple versions. A divine banquet is held in the heavens. Ereshkigal, ruler of the underworld, cannot attend. The living realm is forbidden to her. So she sends a representative. Nergal is among the gods who receive her emissary. At some point during the proceedings, depending on the version, he fails to show proper respect. He does not stand, or he stands improperly, or he neglects a ritual greeting. The infraction is small. The consequence is staggering. Ereshkigal demands he come to the underworld to answer for the offense. What happens next is recorded differently across Akkadian and Assyrian recensions of the myth. But the structural outcome is the same. Nergal descends, spends days in the underworld, leaves, and then cannot stay away. He returns. In some versions, he forces his way back through the 7 gates. In others, he is simply unable to resist. Upon his return, Ereshkigal offers him co-rulership of the Great Below, and he accepts. He becomes king of the place no one is supposed to survive visiting. He chose the underworld. That is the piece that does not fit any familiar mythological template. He was not condemned. He was not tricked beyond recovery. He descended, glimpsed something in Ereshkigal's domain, or in Ereshkigal herself, and came back for it deliberately. In later Babylonian astrology, Nergal was associated with the planet Mars, the red one. The one ancient observers described as appearing brightest precisely during periods of drought and military conflict. The association was not arbitrary. The Babylonian astrologers believed his movements in the sky preceded mass death on the ground. They tracked him obsessively. They built observational infrastructure specifically to watch for him. No other Anunnaki figure was monitored with that kind of systematic fear combined with precise astronomical attention. The last one requires you to hold everything you have just heard in your head at once. Because without the context of the others, what this figure represents collapses into abstraction. With it, it becomes something else entirely. Level 7. Marduk, the god who rewrote history. Around 1792. BCE, a king named Hammurabi took the throne of Babylon, a city that had been a minor administrative center for centuries. Within decades, Babylon was the dominant power in Mesopotamia. By the time Hammurabi's successors had consolidated that power, something had shifted in the Anunnaki pantheon itself. Not in the tablets, but in which tablets were now being written, copied, and distributed. Marduk, city god of Babylon, had moved from regional deity to supreme cosmic authority, and the vehicle for that transformation was a text. The Enuma Elish, composed in its canonical form likely during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar I around 1100 BCE, is a Babylonian creation epic in which Marduk defeats a primordial chaos dragon named Tiamat, splits her body to form the sky and earth, creates humanity from the blood of her slain general, and is then awarded the 50 names of divine authority by a council of gods that includes Anu, Enlil, and Enki, all 3 of whom functionally step back in deference to him. He inherits the mantle of every deity above him in the older Sumerian ordering. In a single literary act, the entire pre-existing hierarchy is reorganized, and Babylon sits at the center of the new cosmic geography. This was not organic theological evolution. Scholars of Mesopotamian religion, Thorkild Jacobsen, W.G. Lambert, have documented how specific epithets previously belonging to Enlil and Enki were transferred wholesale to Marduk in texts produced during and after Babylon's political ascendancy. The same titles, the same attributes. In some cases, the same hymns with the name swapped. The merger was deliberate and coordinated across a scribal tradition that functioned as Babylon's ideological infrastructure. Here is the fracture. The Enuma Elish was recited publicly, in full, during the Babylonian New Year festival, a 12-day ceremony called Akitu, attended by the king and the population of the city. The recitation was not considered historical or artistic. It was considered cosmologically active. Reading it aloud was believed to re-stabilize the universe for another year. The political order of Babylon and the structural order of reality were explicitly merged in a ritual performed continuously for over 1,000 years. By the time Babylon fell to Cyrus the Great in 539 BCE, Marduk had been supreme deity for roughly 6 centuries. His priests handed the city over to Cyrus peacefully. Within a year, Cyrus was producing his own inscriptions, claiming Marduk had chosen him as the legitimate ruler of Babylon. The god outlasted the civilization that built him. He simply found a new king. What Marduk represents, stripped of every theological layer, is the mechanism by which power justifies itself through narrative control. He did not become supreme because he was ancient. He became supreme because someone rewrote the documents while everyone was watching something else. 7 figures. A sky king who convened meetings about human population. A wisdom god who defended humanity through procedural loopholes. An executive deity who scheduled the destruction of cities like administrative closures. A queen of the dead who enforced law without exception, even against her own family. A goddess of love and war who held the patents on civilization itself. A war god who chose death's kingdom over divinity's banquet. A civic deity who rewrote the cosmic order to put his city at its center. Taken individually, these are remarkable artifacts of ancient religious imagination. Placed together, and this is the reframe the popular accounts consistently avoid, they are not a pantheon in any decorative sense. They are a model, a working model of how power distributes itself, defends itself, perpetuates itself, and revises its own origin story when the original story no longer serves the people holding power. The Sumerians were not naive. They were not projecting human drama onto divine figures as a way of explaining weather. They were documenting something about the structure of authority that they understood with uncomfortable clarity. That divine legitimacy is always constructed, always assigned, and always reassignable. Marduk proved that. Enlil proved that. Inanna proved it each time she withdrew her favor from a king and handed it to someone else. Now, the question from the beginning: those kings on the Sumerian king list who reigned for 28,800 years each. Scholars have proposed these are astronomical cycles, misread numerical systems, ritual exaggerations meant to convey divine selection rather than literal duration. All of those explanations are reasonable. None of them is definitive. But here is what the tablets themselves say about the period before those reigns. The Anunnaki were governing directly. No human intermediaries. The list begins with non-human rule, transitions through the flood, and arrives at human kings whose reigns drop suddenly, dramatically, into historically plausible ranges. As though something changed in the management structure. Whatever that transition was, theological metaphor, cultural memory, or something the ancient scribes understood in a register we have not yet found the vocabulary for, the Sumerians recorded it as the moment humanity was handed something it had not previously held: responsibility for its own continuity.